This week we have been uncovering the story of what went on with Father Elijah at the Sierra Madre casino. But there is another story, a story that took place 200 years ago while this casino was being built. This story is told between a dozen or more different terminals scattered amongst the ruins of the villa outside the casino and found within. It's told on scraps of paper, torn journal entries, long-lost audio recordings, and from the memory of the only man living who was there at this time, the only one we can meet, Dean Domino. Our story begins in the Villa police station. From one of the terminals, we first learn the name of the man who owns this casino, Sinclair. He's bankrolling this whole operation, and he's extremely concerned with security. He put into place a list of prohibited items, and he installed a security system which will automatically confiscate anything that it detects as being radioactive or foreign and send it back to the visitor's source address. No sooner had Sinclair given his list of prohibited items to this security force inside the police station than his pal swings in, asking how hard-nosed the security force was going to be. This friend of Sinclair's then gives these people a veiled threat, saying that he can't keep this security force supplied unless they give his friends some respect. He ends by calling the man a prick. Who is the prick? Who are the prick's friends? What supplies has this prick been giving to the security chief and the other security personnel? We learn in the next entry that this list of prohibited items was mainly intended for guests, for visitors to the casino. When the security team asked Sinclair if the construction crew is bound by the same list of prohibitions as the villa guests, Sinclair responded by saying that it was a villa matter. The security guy says, "Great. That means the prick runs the show." Sinclair doesn't want to be bothered with villa matters. As long as people don't get injured, that's all he cares about. What's interesting here is that the police chief writing this uses the phrase, "as long as there were no more accidents among the crews," which leads us to believe that some of the crew building the villa had been involved in accidents in the past. This security person ends by saying that he barely had time to tuck his flask under his desk before Sinclair showed up. Sinclair always gets a disapproving look when he sees the hard stuff. Well, this helps explain how all of our gear got taken from us when we first arrived at the Sierra Madre. Remember at the very beginning when we asked Father Elijah how we got here and what happened to all of our gear, he told us about the defense system.
The Sierra Madre has many defenses, means of screening guests for illicit or dangerous items. Your arrival here, weaponless, was not my intention. The casino, this villa, it takes anything with even a trace of radioactivity, traces of unknown substances, and returns it home. The bunker. The process is automated, and the casino itself has other similar services.
And from this entry, I think we can establish some of the major characters here. The first, of course, is Sinclair, the owner of the casino, and the second is the prick. The prick is a personal friend of Sinclair who seems to have his hands dirty with the day-to-day goings-on of the construction of the villa. He doesn't appear to be directly responsible for managing or creating the villa, but instead he seems to give the work crew the attention that Sinclair isn't giving them. Sinclair appears to be more interested in the casino. He is directly supervising the casino construction, the installation of holograms and security there. Someone else is leading the construction of the outside villa, and the prick is working with whoever that person is. But it seems that this very same prick character is undermining Sinclair's authority. We get the impression that he's coercing this security force to give some of his friends or associates some leeway, possibly with some illegal activity that's going on here, or some sort of activity that Sinclair would have disapproved of. We also get the impression that the supplies the prick is giving to the security force here is likely alcohol and possibly even chems. When Sinclair came by, the security guard hid his booze, knowing that Sinclair would disapprove. In another terminal, we learned that this security force was well armed. The reason is because Sinclair wanted to make sure that the security force here could defend the villa if there was ever any trouble. Sinclair has a keen eye for politics. He sees what's going on in the world. He can forecast that a large catastrophe is looming. So he went out of his way to supply his security force with plenty of weapons, ammunition, and armor, so if it ever came to it, Sinclair could keep his guests safe. This explains why we find so many weapons and armor lying around the villa. Sierra Madre security armor, automatic weapons, and even explosives like frag grenades and mines. And here we learn the source of the vending machines we find around the town. It looks as if Sinclair first saw them on display at the World's Fair. The World's Fair is a real-world expo where representatives from countries around the world will come together and put on big exhibits to show off some of the best things that their country has built. This World's Fair has been going on since 1851. I know a little bit about it because the World's Fair forever changed the skyline of the city where I live. I live in Seattle, Washington, and in 1962, the World's Fair came to Seattle. In preparation for that event, the city of Seattle built a big futuristic monorail which still exists, and the Space Needle, the iconic tower that everybody thinks about when they think of Seattle. All of that was because of the World's Fair. Well, it looks like in the Fallout universe, the World's Fair was alive and strong even up to the year 2077. Sinclair discovered one of these vending machines at a World's Fair exhibit that he went to visit, and he just had to have it at his casino. These vending machines were designed to be conveniences for the guests, but they were also designed to distribute emergency items if there was ever a communist attack. Food, ammunition, repair kits. All of these items are stored in the vending machines, but in order to access them, we have to find special codes that unlock them. We'll talk more about these dispenser codes in our next video on this series, where we talk about loot. But we find these codes in the form of holo messages scattered around the villa and the casino. Using these codes, we can unlock chems, new food items, and even weapon mods. Sinclair was truly ready for the end of the world, which is strange. Why would Sinclair, a man who makes money by building a for-profit casino, be concerned with the end of the world? What is he trying to keep safe in case of the apocalypse? In the next terminal, we get more evidence that Sinclair is a very hands-on leader. He's taking an active role in the construction of his casino and villa, and he came by the police station again to check up on things. Now, at the very beginning, Elijah warned us about some holograms, and it looks like before the bombs dropped, Sinclair was in the habit of being escorted around the villa by these very same security holograms. In this instance, he left them behind, and this security person was really glad. He felt that the holograms were too ghostly, and it kind of bothered him. He also wonders why Sinclair even has a security team on staff if he has these holographic security people that can blast anything. Aside from that, this security person is pretty happy to be working for Sinclair. Sinclair runs a tight ship, which this man says is good to see in these days and times. He ends by saying, I don't know how smart he is trying to make a resort to escape everything in the outside world, but rich guys can make it happen, even ones that have been hit hard, like Sinclair has. Was Sinclair having money problems? Did he lose money at a casino? On the stock market? Did he suffer from a bad investment? It's nice to see empathy for Sinclair coming from this man, to see that not everybody hates the rich just because they're rich. The final note on this terminal helps us solve the puzzle in this room. It also explains why all of the radios are turned on. The night the bombs dropped was also the night of the big gala event, and this security guard didn't want to miss the festivities. He turned on all the radios, including the ones down in the basement, so that he could hear it going on while he was working. In another terminal in the police station, we learn that Sinclair used two different crews for the construction of the casino and the villa. One crew worked on the casino, but a completely different crew worked on the villa. This guy says that he oversaw the installation of the vending machines street side, and that it all went well, he thinks, because the casino crew was running the show. This guy's also concerned with the vending machines. He complained to the police chief about it, saying that he felt that the machines were a company store. This is a bit of an issue because if the only store allowed in the villa is a company store, where the company makes a profit, then the company can set prices, and the company pays their employees, and then the employees are forced to buy back from the company. In this way, the company is really paying itself. This is something Dean Domino tells us when we talk with him about the vending machines. He's not impressed by these machines. He considers them to be grifters because he understands that the money all goes one way.
Yeah, well, machines like those weren't unusual before the bomb. Maybe to you they're amazing. To me, they're grifters without the personality. Sinclair made sure if you spent money here, it went one direction. Although that's not how he described it. Called it self-sufficient. Like he was doing the residents a favor. Right.
He also complains that the staff can barely buy anything. They only get a few chips with their paychecks, and since they don't accept pre-war money, how's the staff supposed to use them? The police staff here is really upset with the list of prohibited items. This officer says that it's going to be impossible to enforce the prohibition list for the crew, let alone to do searches of the crew. But the chief says that what's most important is getting the villa constructed. The prohibition list is mainly for the visitors and the guests, which is where they should put their time instead of patting down the construction crew for liquor and chems, as long as they don't hurt anyone or each other. It seems strange to me that the police chief would be so laissez-faire about the construction crew using items that Sinclair himself wanted prohibited. Could this response from the police chief be due to the words that the prick said to him? After all, the prick came in saying, "You need to leave my friends alone." Could the prick's friends be the villa construction crew? Could the prick be trying to keep the villa construction crew from having all of their chems and booze taken by the police chief? Could the prick be giving booze and chems to the police chief as a bribe to keep the police chief from using his force to search and raid the construction crew? Possibly, but if so, what does the prick get from it? Finally, we learned that Sinclair purposefully made the streets of the villa narrow so that cars can't come here. Sinclair didn't want people to waste gas coming here. And this officer is happy about it. He just doesn't like writing parking tickets. He says it cuts down on the traffic noise too, and Sinclair said that this helps make the resort feel more reclusive, which I can sympathize with. I mean, I love my car, don't get me wrong, but if I'm going on vacation somewhere, if I'm going into the lap of luxury, I like the idea of being away from the modern life. Maybe that's the vibe that Sinclair was trying to get with his casino. One interesting tidbit for Fallout lore freaks is this officer says he is glad he doesn't see any double parking snobs or Christless gas hogs clogging the villa, which of course is why we don't see any cars here. But wait a minute, Christless Corvega gas hogs? From almost everything that I've read, a lot of these Christless vehicles were nuclear powered. But according to this, that's not entirely true. There must have been some vehicles under the Christless brand that were petrol powered. This security guy raises a great point. How does Sinclair expect people to get here if they can't drive? Seems like a pretty extreme system, even for privacy. That is a great question. How did people get here? Well, we got here because Dog found us in one of Elijah's man traps and brought us here. Perhaps Sinclair was planning on building a monorail system, or maybe he had a series of buses that could bus people in and out of the villa from some nearby parking lot. But I'm not sure really, that is speculation. We find more terminal entries when we head to the clinic to find Christine. It's here where we meet our first security holograms, and it's also here where we find a detailed guide explaining how the security holograms work. The terminal is unremarkable, just explaining to us gameplay mechanics, although we do learn a little bit of information about the company that was used to create this hologram system. At the very end, it says that the service contract is with a company with the abbreviations NE. This likely stands for National Electric, which itself is a reference to the real-world company General Electric. We learned that National Electric has installed EBEs in all of the Sierra Madre buildings where the holograms exist. These EBEs are emergency broadcast emitters. This just gives us helpful information that we can use to disable them in the future. We learned from Father Elijah that the company that made these holograms, National Electric, likely used technology that was developed at the Big Empty.
And as much as I've researched hologram technology, the Big Empty facility was clear. Only the Sierra Madre got holograms working properly. The holograms here kill trespassers. That's what I want. Dump one of those emitters in the middle of any battle, there's no defense. It's like holding light in your hands. Can't fight it. Only watch it burn. Just one is a portable army. Arm it. Anyone stands against you dies.
Holograms have been used in the past before, but only the holograms here at the Sierra Madre can actually kill people. Deeper into the clinic, we find a clinic operating room filled with a number of dead bodies. Here we learned that there was a gas leak which injured 3 members of the Sierra Madre construction crew. These workers were working in the Puesta del Sol switching station. They were exposed to some sort of airborne toxin, which came from the ventilation system. The result was that it caused severe damage to lungs and other tissue. But that inhalation wasn't the problem. The problem is when this toxin is absorbed by the skin. This clinic worker theorizes that the gas is building up beneath the town. He asked the foreman to look into it before the government did. And the next note we learn that they received a shipment of chemical suits. But this clinic worker complains, saying that the chemical suits were bulky and hard to move in. He had to get some of the other staff to help him get into the suit. From here on, the construction crew was instructed to keep these suits ready while working on the switching station. This clinic worker then asked Sinclair to order some more in the event that there was some sort of big leak in the villa. And Sinclair agreed immediately. He expressed genuine concern for the workers here in the villa. He asked if he could see the injured workers here in the clinic to make sure that they were okay. But this revelation sheds new light on the ghost people. Because if you take a look at the ghost people, they appear to be wearing some sort of chemical suit or hazmat suit. Each of the ghost people are encased in this thick rubber suit, and they wear a gas mask. We learned from this terminal that it was the crew who were ordered to have these chemical suits handy at all times in case of a gas leak. If this is true, it means that all of the ghost people we have been killing are whatever is left of the construction crew, the very people who built this villa. The toxic cloud, the gas that the clinic complains about on this terminal is very likely the same cloud that we have been running from this entire time. Father Elijah said that no suits, no rebreathers, no hazmat suits can withstand the fog.
Rebreathers, chemical suits, there is no protection against it. It decays all it touches. I found fighting it useless.
But maybe these chemical suits are the very reason the construction crew turned into the ghost people. Maybe it allowed the cloud to seep in slowly, giving the crew and the workers gradual exposure, which, like radiation turned some people into ghouls gradually, turned these workers into these mindless killing machines slowly over time. In another terminal, we learn more about some of the patients that came here to the clinic. Sinclair came here with Miss Vera Keys on 2 occasions. We have not heard much about Vera Keys yet, but she is the starlet who is depicted on the fountain in the villa. These records were transmitted to the Sierra Madre, strangely enough, and then we see a visit by Dean Domino and Miss Keys. 2 different men escorting the same woman to the clinic at different occasions? What's this all about? This record was transmitted to the chief physician's terminal. I wonder if we can find a record of that later. During one of Sinclair's visits, this doctor suggested moving one of the auto docs to a room in the casino and scheduling visits from the doctor to the casino instead of Sinclair and Miss Keys coming here. Sinclair apparently agreed to this, so we should be able to find a room with an auto dock in it once we get to the casino. In the terminal right next to this one, we find more entries on the Sierra Madre Clinic network, and this is the record of the visit by Dean Domino and Miss Keys. Domino brought her to the clinic and explained that Miss Keys had developed some sort of throat infection. He asked if the auto dock could help, and this doctor said, well, what about the auto dock in the Sierra Madre? I just had one moved up there after Sinclair said it was okay. Dean Domino says that he'd rather not go through the auto dock in the casino because he doesn't want to alarm Sinclair. So the doctor went ahead and ran some tests on Miss Keys, only to find out that her voice is fine. Her loss of voice was due primarily to listlessness, which he says is a symptom of excessive Med-X usage. The doctor tried to talk with Miss Keys about it, but Dean Domino intervened, cutting him off. The doctor warned them both, saying, look, too much chem use can render a subject comatose. And Dean Domino just laughed at him. The doctor says that he lost his temper and kicked them both out of the clinic. He ends by saying, I despise that man. In the next entry, we'll learn that Dean Domino came back again by himself to see the results that had been done to Vera Keys' voice. The doctor says Dean Domino seemed concerned that Vera Keys would lose her voice before the gala event. The doctor was stubborn. He says, look, if Miss Keys is concerned, she can come see me. I'm only going to disclose medical information to the patient, not to you. He says that the auto docs are more than capable of healing Miss Keys' voice. If she does end up developing some throat infection, the auto docs will take care of it. They can even operate if necessary. That, apparently, was all the information Dean Domino needed to hear. Once he got the information he needed, he apologized for his poor manners and left a bottle of wine as a token of his appreciation. The doctor felt that that was a bribe, and he says that it's inappropriate. But Dean Dean Domino insisted, and so the doctor dumped the bottle in the trash. We actually find the bottle here, right in the trash bin. So, Dean Domino, even before the gala event, is overly concerned with the quality of Vera Key's voice. I wonder why this could be, and why he'd be trying to hide his concern about her voice from Sinclair. I'm sure we'll find out the answer to that later. It's here where we get the dispenser code for Med-X. And the reason is because Sinclair personally made sure that there was plenty of Med-X available. When talking with the doctor, he said 3 different times that he needed to make sure that the Med-X code was backed up. The doctor wonders, does he realize that he asked me 3 times for the same thing? Why is he so concerned about Med-X? It just must be the stress. In a final terminal here in the clinic, we learn that Miss Keyes is suffering from yet another malady. Not only is her voice gone, not only does she appear tired all the time, but apparently Miss Keyes is suffering from insomnia. The insomnia is getting so bad that Sinclair ordered auto-dock upgrades, which this doctor says must have cost Sinclair a fortune. The new programs for the auto-dock ameliorate the effects of exhaustion. However, the doctor notes that using an auto-dock to cure exhaustion, if used for too long, can become dangerous. Unfortunately, we don't find any codes that we can download that gives us access to a cure for insomnia, but Sinclair was looking into it. The doctor says that these codes are not compatible with the dispensers yet, and so Sinclair says that he's going to make sure to get it done. The doctor ends by saying, I guess his contacts at Big Mountain will be getting a call soon. This is another indication that a lot of the technology that was used here at the Sierra Madre came from the research lab at the Big Empty. After exploring the clinic, we move on to other parts of the villa. While exploring Salida del Sol South, we find 2 paper notes. The first is a journal page, and the second, which is nearby, is a stained page. The journal page reads, "Town's gonna get built. It just ain't built to last. Casino might be a different story. It's like a bank vault to the sky. But that's just me. It's a big show for someone. I hope Sinclair survives this one." And the stained page reads, "Not gonna rat me out for what happened in the villa. I'm not the one who laid the foundation, and I'm not going to take the fall for the supports either. They try to pin this on me. I'll let them all know what's really going on with the construction contracts." So this is really interesting because these were handwritten by the construction crew, the very people who built this villa, the people who lived here and were forced to buy all of their supplies from the dispensers, and who were the very people who turned into the ghost people. Both of the notes mention that the town seems to be poorly built. The journal says it's not built to last, and the second talks about a poor foundation. We see the results of this all around us. The villa is a complete ruin. Walls have completely crumbled. We see rubble in the middle of the streets. Entire rooms have collapsed. Even Father Elijah notes that the villa, in stark contrast to the casino, appears to be poorly built, calling it a failed construction.
Where you're standing is the villa beneath the casino above. The wreckage. The villa lies in the shadow. The villa is a dumping ground of failed construction. Pre-war junk that has aged poorly.
This can partially be explained, I think, by the revelation we learned from an earlier terminal that there were 2 different teams at work here. The construction team who was working on the vault, supervised by Sinclair personally, and the construction team that was assigned to the villa, which had a different supervisor that worked closely with Sinclair's friend, the Prick. This is also the first time we hear of a possible calamity that happened while the villa was being constructed. The torn page is written by somebody who feels like some horrible thing is going to be pinned on him. It sounds almost like there was a collapse. He talks about a foundation that was poorly built, and we get the idea that people were injured. But this worker knows why the foundation was so shoddy, and it's not his fault. He's making a note to unveil how poorly this construction was if at any point he feels like someone's going to try and pin this calamity on him. We find more evidence of this in another terminal here in Salida del Sol South. In a note labeled Infrastructure, we see a construction crew member admit that the support beams for most of the buildings here in Salida del Sol and the villa at large were poorly built. He describes the support beams as shoddy construction. But worse than the support beams is the ventilation system. The ventilation system is poor, which is allowing this toxic gas, this cloud, to build up in the streets, or to build up underneath the city. This author hints at a bigger problem that happened over at Puesta del Sol. I wonder if we'll learn learn more about that later. He still likes this gig. He says, when you count the bonuses they're giving me, sure, this is a great gig, but not when the workers are coughing to death. He ends by saying, I hate to see what this place spits out if someone lets the ventilation system chug along for a few years. We'll have another greener pastures on our hand, easy, and a pile of bodies beyond it. Greener pastures is a reference to Fallout 3. In Fallout 3, we find a toxic waste disposal site called Greener Pastures. This tells us that the illegal dumping of toxic nuclear waste was prolific before the bombs dropped and was public knowledge. Here we have some random worker at a casino in the Sierra Madre who knows all about Greener Pastures in the capital wastelands. And he's terrified to think that whatever strange gas, whatever strange cloud is giving the ventilation system so much trouble is seeping up from the ground, could possibly turn this entire villa into an equally toxic site. Of course, we know 200 years later that he's correct. The ventilation systems did fail. We had to go reactivate them ourselves as part of the quest to get into the casino. And the lack of proper ventilation allowed the cloud to envelop the entire town. Father Elijah credits the cloud as being the reason that all of the old world treasures are still preserved here. The villa hasn't crumbled because of the cloud. The villa crumbled because it was poorly built. The villa crumbled because of poor management. The cloud itself turned the workers into mindless killing machines, but then kept everything preserved in a state very much the way it was before the bombs dropped. In another terminal, we finally learn the name of the man in charge of the villa construction team. He's called Mr. Yesterday. And Mr. Yesterday, the man in charge of the villa construction, says that he thinks he can get the incident covered up. After all, no one really saw what happened when the patio collapsed, and the balcony along with it. Is this the event at Puesta del Sol that was referred to in the previous terminal? Is this the event that the one worker thought someone was going to try and pin on him, which is why he wrote himself a note saying that if anyone does, he'll publicly reveal the whole scandal of the villa's shoddy construction? The villa construction crew was so corrupt that Mr. Yesterday says that he can get all references in the clinic to this disaster deleted, so that hopefully Sinclair will never know. But this man writing on this terminal is getting nervous. He says this is a huge gamble. It won't be long before people see the villa for what it is. Sand, barely held together with spit and glue. We may be protected legal-wise, but even so, this is criminal. It's like Mr. Yesterday doesn't even want this place to last. What is Mr. Yesterday's motivation? What is he trying to accomplish here? Why is he going out of his way to make the villa so poorly constructed? In another terminal, we see an employee complain that the villa is practically cardboard. But he notes with surprising accuracy that the casino is the exact opposite. It was built to last, and he wonders about that. It's not built like a casino. It's built like a place for people to take cover once the big one hits. Those doors, he says, can be hermetically sealed, and whatever they have lining the floors screws up anything not hooked up directly by wires. Not even radio signals can travel between floors in the Sierra Madre casino. Word is, he says, while Mr. Yesterday's got the villa covered, Sinclair's locking up the Sierra Madre like a golden trap. A trap? Well, what is it? Is it a casino? Or is it a bomb shelter? Or is it a trap? Or is it all three? At this point in our exploration, we finally have access to Dean Domino. Dean Domino, after all, was alive back then. He's already been mentioned in a few of these terminals, and we can ask him about what really went on 200 years ago. We can ask him about the Vera hologram and Miss Keys, who's referenced many times in the clinic. Who is this Vera Keys?
Yeah, don't you? Or guess Vera Keys got lost along with the rest of the hollow archives when the bomb hit, huh? Ghost in name and image. Still a looker, though. Got to hand it to Sinclair. Sure can pick him. Well, or get picked. Whichever.
So Sinclair picked her, you say? I guess that means they were a romantic item? This would explain why they came to the clinic together and why Sinclair was so concerned with her health. But it doesn't explain why Dean was so concerned with her voice. Can you tell me about her?
Vera was a big star back before the bomb. Not the best actress, but, well, she had other talents. Nice voice, nice legs. For some reason, Sinclair, he built this place. She caught his eye. Once he was hooked, that was it. Had to have her. So made the introductions, and guess what? He builds this place for her like some kind of Cleopatra obsession. Wasn't always a death trap.
Ah, at last we understand why Sinclair built this place. He built this place for her. He says, it wasn't always a death trap, although we find out later how wrong he is. But he also said that he introduced them. Dean, you knew Vera before she knew Sinclair?
Of course. What, some kind of surprise to you that I knew people once? Used to have my name in lights, all right? Knew a dozen Veras, or whatever her name was. Vera Keys. Figured I could pay Sinclair back, introduce the two. Guy was a slouch in the dame department, had to pick up the slack somehow.
Poor Sinclair. But kinda typical. Sinclair, probably a visionary, a man of business, a man who made a name for himself, who created his own wealth, probably never had time for a wife, never had time to chase after women. But even such rich men can get lonely. Maybe he thought he could find true love using his wealth and power. And it looks like he put his sights on Vera Keys. And it looks like Dean Domino knew fully well that the villa was poorly made. When we ask him why the gala event is tied to the casino generators, he explains to us that the gala is tied to the casino's power, which incidentally is how we're gonna get in.
Right, look. So not everything about the villa was the pinnacle of bright ideas. In order to pull off the gala, old Sinclair had to get creative. The Sierra Madre announcement, for example. Not just for the casino, not at all. The gala's tied to the casino, draws on its power. Might cause it to reset itself, open the doors for a bit like it was supposed to.
And at last we learn the source of the Sierra Madre broadcast, why Vera Keys' voice reaches out to us 200 years after the gala event.
Well, Vera's beautiful voice doesn't run on casino power exactly. Her broadcast is tied into the emergency broadcast signal for the Sierra Madre. You know, in case of attack. Well, guess what? The night of the gala event, the emergency signal went out all right. But because the broadcast had been hooked up to the gala event, instead of an emergency signal, you get Vera's voice on the radio. Great, huh?
So the signal we picked up was not an invitation after all. It was an emergency broadcast, a call for help. But by a quirk of the power situation here at the casino, instead of sending out the emergency signal, it sent out the gala invitation, because the bombs just so happened to drop at the exact moment of the gala event, confusing the signal, sending out one instead of the other.
Yeah, the Sierra Madre's last song, one only a few people are ever going to hear. A little sad, but what can you do?
We then move on to explore Puesta del Sol North. In one of the rooms, we find a stained note. Liquor shipment finally came in today. Didn't realize working here would be like working in a dry state. Just need to keep it out of sight of security and Sinclair, and ought to take the edge off the day. I'm keeping it stashed in the back. More evidence of Sinclair's efforts to keep anything toxic, anything radioactive, anything harmful out of his casino and out of the villa. In one terminal, we find a note labeled "Damn Raid." We remember that Sinclair was breathing down the police chief's neck to make sure that the police chief controlled these banned substances. It was all of the police officers who complained to the chief saying that it's impossible to enforce these rules. And it's here that we learn that the reason the police chief decided to raid these homes is because of Dean Domino. Dean Domino made him mad. But we remember from the police chief's terminal that it was the prick that came into his office right after Sinclair was breathing down his neck about those banned substances, trying to get the police chief to go easy on his friends. This makes the police chief mad, and so in retaliation, who is it that he raids? The villa construction workers. This must mean that Dean Domino is the prick, and Dean Domino's friends are the villa construction workers led by Mr. Yesterday. Dean Domino is in cahoots with Mr. Yesterday. Dean Domino is the one trying to bribe the police to turn a blind eye to the booze and chems that he gets from Mr. Yesterday and the villa construction team. It's Dean Domino who is Sinclair's friend and who likely has access to all of the booze and chems to begin with. It's he that smuggles it in for the workers. But why is Dean Domino working with Mr. Yesterday? What's in it for him? Luckily, the workers had all of their stashes tucked away when they arrived, and the security force didn't find much. This worker is really angry at the casino's policy. He says he's sick and tired of these spot checks and getting stripped by casino search programs every time he enters the villa. He says, what's Sinclair's problem with chems? He could use some, and so could that pretty bride-to-be, though she looks half doped up with that expression of hers. Medex, from the looks of it. This may explain why Sinclair worked with the clinic to make sure that Medex was readily available from these dispensers. Maybe he knew that his love, Veracruz, had a problem with Medex, if even this worker could tell. In contrast to some of the previous terminal entries, where we've seen the medical staff, the police force, and even some of the other workers express sympathy for Sinclair and to treat him with kindness, because after all, Sinclair has been so kind to them and shown them such concern, there are other workers who are not kind to Sinclair. These are the workers who are bitter that he's trying to keep them away from booze and chems. And we also see that Sinclair at some times comes down to check on the progress of the villa. He scheduled a tour of the villa, and one of the workers here wanted to make sure that the other employees looked, quote, sharp for the suit. But he's not bringing the starlet. He's not bringing Vera Keys, so many of the boys were upset. At the very end, he threatens Sinclair's life. He says Sinclair had better watch himself. He might have a nasty fall in the switching station. But it looks like later he changes his mind. The man must have only known Sinclair by reputation, having not met him face to face. In another entry, he describes the visit with Sinclair, and he says, Sinclair was a lot more level-headed than I was expecting, especially after Mr. Yesterday's cracks. Sinclair is sharper than one of those knives, too. He asked a lot of really good questions about the foundations, and some of them not even I could answer. Sinclair knows engineering, that's for sure, and this worker is worried that he's going to see through the cardboard town for what it really is. We find another terminal with a personal log inside one of these construction worker homes. This employee is wondering why no one has wisened up to what's been going on here at the villa yet. The foreman just looked at him and winked. He says, we've got someone watching out for us. An ace in the hole. As long as we are good until showtime, this whole villa is going to be the biggest con of all time. And we learn the extent of some of Mr. Yesterday's scheming. Half of the maintenance shipments aren't even coming through. Sinclair's still paying for them. That money's going into Mr. Yesterday's pockets, but the shipments never arrive. Sinclair never notices. He's too blinded by the starlet. He can't see beyond his work at the casino. So, Mr. Yesterday and the rest of the crew here is able to cut corners when they need to, and no one's going to look close enough at the budgets to ever find out. And even once they finally do, we'll be long gone. And this finally tells us what Dean's role in all of this is. Dean is their ace in the hole. Dean is the man who is watching out for them. Dean must have been on intimate terms with Sinclair and Vera Keys. After all, Dean is the one who introduced Vera to Sinclair. Maybe after that introduction, he became a trusted friend and associate. He clearly spent a lot of time here. Maybe he even lived here. Maybe he used his sly charm and his slick tongue to lie for Mr. Yesterday, to lie about the budget and the construction going on, to convince Sinclair that everything was kosher, everything was going as planned. That must be the ace in the hole that he is referring to here. But it looks like the ace in the hole was not enough for the foreman. He wanted a bigger slice of the pie. He decided to blackmail Mr. Yesterday. He went to Mr. Yesterday to try and renegotiate their arrangement, to move that percentage point around. To protect himself, and in case the negotiation didn't go the way he hoped, he left ordnance in maintenance in case things got, quote, difficult, so that he could blow this death trap wide open. Mr. Yesterday agreed to discuss things in the switching station so they couldn't be overheard. But we already know that the switching station is flooded with the cloud. I wonder how many people, knowing the gas was in the switching station, meet their enemies there to enact personal revenge, or to get rid of pesky blackmailers. In another terminal, we learned that demolition charges showed up. Mr. Yesterday claims to not know anything about this shipment, but he did ask if anyone had made a buck off of it. He wonders if the C4 was something Sinclair ordered, or if it's another mistake like the cosmic knives. Well, I think this entry is here to explain why we find detonators and explosives throughout the villa. Or maybe the explosives were used in the fireworks display. As we explore Puesta del Sol North, we find a terminal that talks about an accident. The author says that this place is a safety inspector's dream or nightmare. The foreman ended up taking a fall in the switching station, breaking one of his legs and his neck, but at least he didn't die from it. He didn't die from it, but he did bleed before anyone found him. The poor guy, it wasn't even his shift. He has no idea what the foreman was doing there. But wait a minute. We know why the foreman was there. We just read a note from a man who intended to blackmail Mr. Yesterday. This must have been the foreman. And Mr. Yesterday responded to the foreman by saying, "Let's meet in the switching station." Mr. Yesterday must have pushed the foreman off of the gantry, where he fell down into the cloud below, broke both of his legs and his neck. Mr. Yesterday then left the foreman for dead. All because the foreman knew exactly what Mr. Yesterday was doing and threatened to blackmail him and tell Sinclair. The author of this note doesn't suspect that Mr. Yesterday tried to kill the foreman, and he doesn't know anything about the foreman's attempt at blackmail. He just knows that now that the foreman is injured, he got promoted to the foreman's old job. Once we reach Puesta del Sol South, we find another terminal that talks about Dean Domino. Dean wanted to find out how some of the other workers were taking the foreman's accident. Maybe he wanted to find out what they were saying about the accident. Did they realize that it wasn't really an accident? Clearly, Dean knew what Mr. Yesterday had done. Otherwise, why would he be coming to the construction crew and snooping around, trying to figure out what they know about the foreman's accident? Something about Dean's appearance and Dean's questions didn't sit right with this particular author. The writer here says that guy's a snake, laying on the fake charm, trying to be one of us. Dean asked if they were being paid as befits our skills. He said that if they weren't, to come to him, and he'd set them up. But this worker isn't fooled. He says he's seen the percentages. He knows that someone is making a killing off of the corners we're cutting. Sounds like Dean Domino and construction are arm in arm. Ultimately, it doesn't matter to this employee as long as his cash gets left in his drawer every week. At last, we understand why Mr. Yesterday is going out of his way to do such a poor job building this villa. And at last, we understand what Dean Domino is trying to get out of a partnership with Mr. Yesterday. The reason Mr. Yesterday is doing such a poor job building the villa is because he's taking Sinclair's money, pocketing as much of it as he possibly can, and only using the bare minimum to build the cheapest town he can. Sinclair isn't getting his money's worth. Mr. Yesterday is pocketing it. Dean Domino's role is to provide the construction crew with booze and chems that will keep them quiet. Sinclair has locked it down so that they can't get booze and chems otherwise, but Dean Domino can sneak stuff in. If he supplies them with booze and chems, they're going to be less likely to tell Sinclair about what's really going on. They're going to be more compliant. Dean's role is also to try and convince the police to leave the construction crew alone and to stop searching them. Now, sometimes this backfires when Dean's personality rubs the police chief the wrong way. After all, the police chief has to sometimes make it look like he's doing his job, but he bribes them by giving them booze and chems, hoping that they'll leave the construction crew alone. In return, Dean Domino probably gets a portion of the money that Mr. Yesterday keeps from the villa construction budget. Dean Domino is exploiting his friendship with Sinclair to run a con on Sinclair. We'll learn more of the story behind the cloud when we get to the switching station in search of Christine. William Ennis was the maintenance man in charge of this switching station, and he did his best to communicate as much as he knew to a man named Conrad Simmons. Ennis learned early that the ventilation system in the switching station was so poorly designed and implemented that it was constantly breaking down. He says, "The ventilation system is on the fritz again." The room where Ennis typically deals with maintenance and power issues is small, cramped, and hot. And because of that, he ended up getting a remote password, which we use later in the quest to allow Christine to operate the system. In another terminal, he says the ventilation is shot to hell. The pipes are backed up, and the chambers started spewing out this red dust cloud like rust. This switching station is the source of the cloud. Now, we don't learn this from the Dead Money DLC, but when we explore the Big Empty in Old World Blues, we learn that the researchers at the Big Empty are the ones who conjured up the cloud. It was a toxin designed by those scientists, and they purposefully placed it in the switching station here at the Sierra Madre as an experiment to see what would happen. They did this behind Sinclair's back. Sinclair never knew that the cloud was not a natural occurrence, that it came from Big Mountain. But there was an experiment within an experiment. Alongside this cloud experiment to see what would happen, they wanted to see whether or not the hazmat suits that they created were effective. And so they gave Sinclair all of these hazmat suits to hand out to the construction crew. That was an experiment that Sinclair did know about. He knew that the Big Empty was experimenting with these hazmat suits. He just didn't know that they also were responsible for the need of those hazmat suits. As we already learned from exploring the clinic, a couple of guys working here in the switching station got hit with huge doses of the cloud, which completely knocked them out of commission. When Mr. Yesterday found out that these guys were in the clinic, he says, well, there's no way that I can pay them. They're not working. But he does say that he's gonna do what he can to see if he can get them something on the side. Ennis here believes that he's trying to get them chems, or maybe a little bit of money to keep their mouths shut. In another terminal, we learned that the effects of being exposed to this gas are really long term. The guys hit by the gas earlier are still out of commission. Because of this, everyone is pulling extra hours and employees are starting to grumble. Mr. Yesterday is keeping the hard liquor and chems coming right under Sinclair's eye. But Ennis here complains that that's not helping. The chems and booze may be keeping people quiet, it may be keeping some of the workers happy, but Ennis just needs those guys back. These people can't be working extra hours here in the switching station. If they get one more chemical leak like that, it's going to completely shut down construction here in the villa for the rest of the year. And so at last, the chemical suits that we read about earlier arrived here at the switching station. Ennis says that the suits are kind of creepy looking and that it's hard to talk with them, so they resorted to using sign language to communicate with each other. Even more evidence that these suits are the very suits that the ghost people wear. Ennis expresses his concern over this gas. He says, "This worries me. That gas really messed those boys up." He conjectures that if the gas were to ever get out of the pipes, it could wipe out the entire villa. And of course, he's right. In one of the lockers, we find the effects of their experimentations on the gas. We learned in the last terminal that they put on these suits to go and explore this toxic gas to figure out what it was. This is the sample they scraped off, but the sample doesn't tell us anything. A note that comes with it just says that the worker is really glad to be out of that suit. They almost lost some of their men trying to scrape these samples together. In another terminal, we learned that Ennis and his team finally found the source of the gas. It was coming from some ventilation pipes in the very bottom of the switching station. As they were exploring one of the main pipes, they found traces of the gas. The problem was, despite the sealant on the suit, that red stuff, the gas, the cloud still got inside the suit. Turns out that the gas erodes the metal on the suit locks. Not only did one of his boys get exposed, but everyone who went down there got locked in their suits. That's why the construction crew is still wearing the suits. The gas erodes the metal, making it impossible to take them off. And it helps explain why the crew turned into these mindless killing machines. The eroded metal on the suits still allowed some gas to trickle in slowly, which, if it functions anyway like radiation in the Fallout universe, possibly rotted them away, much like radiation does to feral ghouls. In the final terminal here in the switching station, we learn what some of the employees had to do to get those suits off. The docs at the clinic were mad at them for doing this, but what option did they have? The corrosive cloud melted the metal latches on the suits, so they were forced to take those cosmic knives and cut themselves out of the suit. This man says, "I can't wait for the job to be over so we can let the villa collapse on itself. People will be too busy in the casino anyway." And that, ladies and gentlemen, ends all of the lore that we find outside of the casino. The story picks up back inside the casino, where we find the remains of scared lovers killed by security holograms. And we finally tell the full story of the love triangle between Sinclair, Vera Keys, and Dean Domino. We'll conclude the pre-war history of the Sierra Madre Casino in my next video. If you want to make sure that you don't miss that video, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I have to go out of town. I'm going to be gone for 3 days, but never fear, I have content already made and scheduled to publish while I'm away. We will resume our exploration of the Dead Money DLC when I get back. We'll finish off with my final video on the pre-war history of the casino and a video of all the loot and achievements that we can get from the DLC. We'll tackle those topics next week. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.